Well, thank you for joining me for another time of studying God's Word. This week we're in Genesis chapter 41. We're nearing the end here, aren't we? When we last left Joseph, he was going nowhere fast. He had been promoted just about as far as he was going to in his present situation. He was the prisoner who took care of all the other prisoners with no hopes of parole. Two of his fellow prisoners were the former chief baker and former chief cupbearer for the king of Egypt. They had angered the king in some way and had found themselves in this prison being taken care of by this Hebrew prisoner, Joseph. As time went on, these two former officials both had dreams on the same night. It couldn't have been a coincidence, so they really wanted to know what these dreams were all about, and these dreams troubled them. Joseph was given the interpretations of these dreams by God. One favorable interpretation and one not so much. The cupbearer would be released from prison and restored to his position as he was before. The baker, he was going to lose his life. Both interpretations came to pass, just as Joseph had told them it would. The one thing that didn't happen was that the cupbearer didn't remember Joseph once he was restored to his position. Well, I guess he had a short memory. It says in verses 1 through 8, when 2 full years had passed, Pharaoh had a dream. He was standing by the Nile when out of the river there came up 7 cows, sleek and fat, and they grazed among the reeds. After them 7 other cows, ugly and gaunt, came up out of the Nile and stood beside those on the river bank. And the cows that were ugly and gaunt ate up the 7 sleek, fat cows. Then Pharaoh woke up. He fell asleep again and had a second dream. 7 heads of grain, healthy and good, were growing on a single stalk. After them 7 other heads of grain sprouted, thin and scorched by the east wind. The thin heads of grain swallowed up the 7 healthy, full heads. Then Pharaoh woke up. It had been a dream. In the morning his mind was troubled, so he sent for all the magicians and wise men of Egypt. Pharaoh told them his dreams, but no one could interpret them for him. Well, here we go again with dreams again. This time it's the Pharaoh who had the dreams, plural. He was standing by the Nile and saw 7 healthy cows come up and graze, and then 7 sickly cows, and they came up and ate the sleek fat cows. Who ever heard of cows eating cows? This wasn't a dream, it was a nightmare that woke Pharaoh up in the middle of the night. He was finally able to get back to sleep, apparently, but he had another startling dream. This time it was 7 healthy heads of grain being swallowed up by 7 thin, scorched heads. He woke up again and called for all the magicians and all the wise men of the land to come. Maybe they could help interpret these dreams for him. But nobody could be found that could do that. Again, the Egyptians were fascinated by dreams and had people who specialized in interpreting them, but nobody could be found to interpret these particular dreams of Pharaoh. Now verses 9 through 14 says, Then the chief cupbearer said to Pharaoh, Today I am reminded of my shortcomings. Pharaoh was once angry with his servants, and he imprisoned me and the chief baker in the house of the captain of the guard. Each of us had a dream the same night, and each dream had a meaning of its own. Now a young Hebrew was there with us, a servant of the captain of the guard. He told him our dreams, we told him our dreams, and he interpreted them for us, giving each man the interpretation of his dream. And things turned out exactly as he has interpreted them to us. I was restored to my position, and the other man was hanged. So Pharaoh sent for Joseph, and he was quickly brought from the dungeon. When he had shaved and changed his clothes, he came before Pharaoh. The forgetful cupbearer here finally comes through for poor Joseph. 2 years late, might I add, but he comes through. He remembers the former prisoner that was with him, and how he had interpreted the dreams that he and the chief baker had while they were there in prison. He must have known what he was talking about, for both of his interpretations had come to pass. The cupbearer was restored. The baker, he was hanged. Just maybe this man could interpret the Pharaoh's dreams. The king had Joseph shaved and cleaned up before he came before him. And this king must have been a native Egyptian himself, for shaving was an important part of the native Egyptians' lives. It was important to them, so apparently he was a native Egyptian king. Only after this shave and change of clothes was Joseph made presentable to appear before Pharaoh. And now comes the moment of truth. Would Joseph once again be able to interpret the dreams of Pharaoh? Let's look at verses 15 through 32. Pharaoh said to Joseph, I had a dream, and no one can interpret it, but I have heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. I cannot do it, Joseph replied to Pharaoh, but God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, in my dream, I was standing on the bank of the Nile, when out of the river there came up 7 cows, fat and sleek, and they grazed among the reeds. After them 7 other cows came up, scrawny and very ugly and lean. I'd never seen such ugly cows in all the land of Egypt. The lean, ugly cows ate up the 7 fat cows that came up first. But even after they ate them, no one could tell that they had done so. They looked just as ugly as before. Then I woke up. In my dreams, I also saw 7 heads of grain, full and good, growing on single stalk. After them 7 other heads sprouted, withered and thin and scorched by the east wind. The thin heads of grain swallowed up the 7 good heads. I told this to the magicians, but none could explain it to me. Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, the dreams of Pharaoh are one and the same. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good heads of grain are 7 years. It is one and the same dream. The 7 lean, ugly cows that came up afterward are 7 years, and so are the 7 worthless heads of grain scorched by the east wind. They are 7 years of famine. It is just as I said to Pharaoh. God has shown Pharaoh what he's about to do. 7 years of great abundance are coming throughout the land of Egypt, but 7 years of famine will follow. Then all the abundance in Egypt will be forgotten, and the famine will ravage the land. The abundance in the land will not be remembered, because the famine that follows it will be so severe. The reason the dream was given to Pharaoh in 2 forms is that the matter has been firmly established, or firmly decided by God, and God will do it soon. So here Pharaoh recounts his dreams to Joseph. Joseph tells Pharaoh that not only are they one and the same dream, but that God has provided him with an interpretation. Notice again how God gets the glory here through what Joseph is doing. There would be 7 good years, and then 7 years of famine in the land of Egypt and beyond. Sort of a good news, bad news situation here, right? The good news is that there will be 7 years of great abundance in the land of Egypt. But the bad news is there will be 7 years of famine that will follow, and it will ravage the land. The second 7-year period would be so bad that the previous 7 years, they'd be forgotten altogether. Joseph also adds that God has given to Pharaoh this dream in 2 forms to stress how sure it's going to be. It's really going to happen. It is set in stone. He had better ready himself and his kingdom for what was to come. So verses 33 through 36 says, "And now let Pharaoh look for a discerning and wise man and put him in charge of the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh appoint commissioners over the land to take a fifth of the harvest of Egypt during the 7 years of abundance. They should collect all the food of these good years that are coming and store up the grain under the authority of Pharaoh to be kept in the cities for food. This food should be held in reserve for the country, to be used during the 7 years of famine that will come upon Egypt, so that the country may not be ruined by the famine." Joseph goes from interpreting the dreams to instructing the king how to handle the situation at hand. It was certainly a situation in which Joseph really shined. He was certainly a gifted individual by God. First, Pharaoh must choose the right man for the plan. He had to be a wise man, wise enough to do what was necessary, and their survival depended upon it. Then Joseph not only told him what kind of man to go through with this plan, but he also told him the plan here. They would take a fifth of the harvest over the next 7 years and store it in the city so that there would be plenty of food to last for the 7 bad years, the 7 years of want in the land. It would be the only way his country could survive the ravages of the coming famine. So verses 37 through 46 says, "The plan seemed good to Pharaoh and to all his officials. So Pharaoh asked them, 'Can we find anyone like this man, one in whom is the Spirit of God?' Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, 'Since God has made all this known to you, there is no one so discerning and wise as you. You shall be in charge of my palace, and all my people are to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you.' So Pharaoh said to Joseph, 'I hereby put you in charge of the whole land of Egypt.' Then Pharaoh took his signet ring from his finger and put it on Joseph's finger. He dressed him in robes of fine linen and put a gold chain around his neck. He had him ride in a chariot as his second in command, and men shouted before him, 'Make way!' Thus he put him in charge of the whole land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, 'I am Pharaoh, but without your word no one will lift hand or foot in all Egypt.' Pharaoh gave Joseph the name Zaphenath-Paneah and gave him Asenath, daughter of Potiphera, priest of On, to be his wife, and Joseph went throughout the land of Egypt. Joseph was 30 years old when he entered the service of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And Joseph went out from Pharaoh's presence and traveled throughout Egypt." This is really a rags to riches story for sure. Joseph was not only the man with the plan, but he was the one chosen to work the plan. The king gives Joseph the task of preparing the land and its people for the coming famine. He would be the person in charge of this great undertaking. Not only this, but he would be put in charge of the king's own palace and household, and the entire land for that matter. He would be number 2 to the king, and number 2 in the whole land. Whatever Joseph said, that's exactly what would be done. In order for the kingdom to know of Joseph's power and authority, he was given the king's own signet ring. Now, this ring was often used to seal documents to show that they had the king's literal seal of approval on them. Nobody could argue the authenticity of anything with the king's seal upon it. Joseph was also fitted with clothes befitting of his new royal status as number 2 in the land. So Pharaoh gave this 30-year-old Hebrew man a new name and put him in charge of Egypt. plus he gave them an Egyptian wife. Joseph proceeded to travel throughout the land and make plans for the coming 7 years of abundance that would help them cope with the 7 years of want. Verses 47 through 49 says, "During the 7 years of abundance, the land produced plentifully. Joseph collected all the food produced in those 7 years of abundance in Egypt and stored it in the cities. In each city he put the food grown in the fields surrounding it. Joseph stored up huge quantities of grain, like the sand of the sea. It was so much that he stopped keeping records because it was beyond measure." So Joseph had set up these storage facilities in each major city so that they might be filled up with this grain from the 7 good years as it was harvested. His efforts saw apparently overwhelming success, so much so that they stopped keeping records because there was so much grain. Now verses 50 through 52 says, "Before the years of famine came, 2 sons were born to Joseph by Asenath, daughter of Potiphar, priest of On. Joseph named his firstborn Manasseh and said, 'It is because God has made me forget all my trouble and all my father's household.' The second son he named Ephraim and said, 'It is because God has made me fruitful in the land of my suffering.'" God continued to give Joseph success in all the things that he did, including starting a family. He was blessed by 2 sons during these 7 years of abundance in the land. Manasseh, his name meaning to forget all your toil, and Ephraim, to be fruitful. If you fast forward to the time of Joshua and the Promised Land, you understand that these 2 sons actually become the 2 tribes that were given their own portions of the land. For now, they stood as God's presence and blessing for this man who has already gone through so much suffering and tragedy. This had certainly improved for him, being sold as a slave by his own brothers, and now he finds himself number 2 in the land of Egypt. So verses 53 through 57 says, "The 7 years of abundance in Egypt came to an end, and the 7 years of famine began, just as Joseph had said. There was famine in all the other lands, but in the whole land of Egypt there was food. When all Egypt began to feel the famine, the people cried to Pharaoh for food. Then Pharaoh told all the Egyptians, 'Go to Joseph and do what he tells you.' When the famine had spread over the whole country, Joseph opened the storehouses and sold grain to the Egyptians, for the famine was severe throughout Egypt. And all the countries came to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph, because the famine was severe in all the world." So the 7 years of abundance came to an end. Now it was time to contend with these 7 years of famine, of want. It was so severe that the storehouses were opened up, and the people streamed from all parts of Egypt into these storehouse cities and beyond to purchase the grain stored there. As we will soon see, Joseph is being used by God to save much more than just Egypt and its people. He would save his own people, in fact. What can we learn from our lesson today from this chapter 41 of Genesis? Well, what about this? God brings about things in his own perfect timing. Think about that for a moment. Joseph was put in just the right place and time in order to interpret the Pharaoh's dreams and ultimately to become number 2 in the land of Egypt. God had set him up for what was yet to come, just as he prepares us daily for what's ahead of us in the coming days. May we praise God for it. May God bless you and keep you and give you peace till we can meet here again and study his word.